Hi, my name is Dan Marek. I'm the Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development for Ruby. Welcome to our event today. We are doing our Ask Me Anything hours today, which is our office hours. This is an open platform for our students to be able to ask questions or anything related to cooking. If you do have questions, you can actually just type them in the top right-hand side of the box on our platform here, where it says Add Question Here, and ask the question. If you see a question underneath there that you really like, you can also hit the heart icon to be able to upvote that so people will answer it more quickly. So let's get started in with our questions from our students. Our first question today actually comes from Laura P. When creating a dish from scratch, how do you know, apart from having already tried and or knowing your taste of your guests, which foods generally go well together and which do not? Are there any guidelines in this regard? Thank you. That's a great question. And that's actually a wonderful sign that you're really growing as a cook, which is wonderful too. So there are a couple things to do, with this. Primarily it is experience. The more you cook and the more you use different ingredients, the more you'll actually see how they go together. I used to do an experiment with kids in a couple youth farms here as well, which they were like community farms that the kids actually helped run, which is pretty neat. And what I would do is actually get a whole host of different ingredients and have the kids try them next to each other. And then try to put them together and try them at the same time. So it might be something like herbs would probably be one of my big things that I have kids try as well. So I might take something like cilantro and then pair it with something like an onion, or put cilantro and parsley together and have those paired together as well, to be able to see which ones work and which ones don't. A lot of times you can actually help this dilemma by thinking about different styles of food and what ingredients are used in those kinds of ethnic cuisines that pair well together. There's also a great book. I actually just happen to have one that's right by me here. It's actually called The Flavor Bible. This book is actually a wonderful resource. It's actually, I used to say it was one of my favorite cookbooks. There's also, I have another version of it downstairs called the Vegetarian Flavor Bible, if you want the one that's just vegetarian ingredients as well. But either one actually works really well. And the way this book actually works is that it is lined out. Instead of having recipes, it'll line out with different ingredients and show you what pairs well with each other. So it's a great resource, and it actually answers exactly the question you were looking for. So this is actually written by Karen Page and Andrew Dorenberg, and it's definitely something that I would recommend. It's a great book to be able to, page through. It's a great reference book. Again, it's not quite a culinary, like a cooking or recipe book, but it is a great culinary tool. So besides experimenting in your own kitchen and your own garden or window bed, with tasting different things, putting them together and tasting them together, having the Flavor Bible is actually a really good resource to be able to have. But really, experience is what's going to help you grow in this. So I hope that helps, Laura. On to our next question. How do I create tasty dishes without salt or oil? Thanks, Serene. So this is actually a specialty of mine. I started cooking with no oil about 15 years ago when I was working at Whole Foods Markets and running a raw vegan venue at their flagship store in Austin, Texas. At this time, Whole Foods had launched their program called Health Starts Here. And one of the pillars was that we didn't actually use oil in it at all. It was actually right before the launch of Forks Over Knives, and Forks Over Knives helped kind of develop out of that entire program and that thinking about no oil and whole food plant-based diets. So, really looking at dishes to be able to avoid oil was something that we started immediately to try to figure out how to be able to do it, because at the time, everything had oil. You'd always see it in cooking shows, and they used to do butter, big dobs of butter or whole sticks of butter into dishes. And then when that kind of came out of fashion, I guess, if you will, oil became the new thing, and it was always extra virgin olive oil. And they'd say you put 3 tablespoons in, but they'd be glugging that bottle like crazy, and it'd be a lot of oil and everything. So when we started doing the conversions over to no oil recipes, we had to experiment quite a lot. But what we found was that it wasn't needed in most of the places that we thought. So, the especially extra virgin olive oil is one of those oils that has a low heat temperature too. So you typically will burn off a lot of the flavor from it, and you're getting rid of there are barely any nutrients in it to begin with, but to be able to burn them off while you're cooking with it. It just seemed kind of worthless. So water became my go-to dish or my go-to substitute for a lot of those dishes. In a lot of our classes, we'll show you how to caramelize onions with just using water. That's actually a great tip to be able to start. You can literally cook almost anything in a water substitute instead of the oil. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule, but most of them are actually not plant-based. Like you wouldn't want to try to fry an egg, without that fat on the bottom of it. Um, but pretty much everything else in our plant world will be able to cook in some way or fashion using a substitute, being either water or vegetable stock. There are all kinds of other things to be able to cook in except for using that oil. Now, the salt thing is a different thing as well. Most culinary schools, when you graduate, they tell you that, your fat, salt, are two of your biggest things you want to focus on. And salt is something I've actually never really used a lot. I grew up in a family where we didn't use it a lot because of health reasons, and it just became kind of a normal thing for me. And when I started cooking professionally, I didn't use a lot of salt either. A lot of my chef friends were like, "That's crazy, you don't use any salt in this." And the real key to that, to not using a lot of salt, is using fresh ingredients that are in season because they have the most flavor in them and they have the biggest bang for their buck right away. Salt is usually added to be able to enhance the flavors out of ingredients, to be able to make them taste better. So the more fresh you can choose your ingredients and in season, the better. In season is a pretty important component of that as well, because the more something is in season, the more flavor you're going to get out of it. If it's something that's out of season, think of like a tomato right in the middle of winter. That tomato doesn't quite taste like a tomato anymore. Now, it's been grown just like all the other tomatoes that you grow in the middle of the summer, but that tomato in the wintertime is usually coming from another country. So it usually has to travel from, say, very southern Mexico to wherever you are in the United States or other places to be able to get, that trip can take like 7 to 10 days. So that entire time after it's been picked from the vine, it's starting to lose its flavor and lose its nutrients because it's starting to decompose literally the second you take it from the vine. So choosing ingredients that are in season and fresh, as close to you as possible, is really the best way to be able to avoid salt that I've found in my own personal life, because you're really getting that really big pop of flavor from the ingredients instead of using salt as the crutch. Now, in some areas, you do need to be able to have salt as a seasoning, but it's pretty rare that you actually need something to be able to kick it up. And typically, it's just because the ingredients aren't in season or aren't as fresh as you'd like. So I hope that helps, Serene. All right, from Deborah. Hi, Chef Dan. Is there a difference in cooking time with organic versus non-organic vegetables? Actually, there isn't. There's not any cooking difference between the two that I can think of off the top of my head, but I've never run into that case at all. Organic versus conventional are basically the only two different things. Is the conventional are sprayed with pesticides or use pesticides to be able to control insects and animals and stuff like that from eating them. The organic doesn't use those, or they use other safer versions of those. But pretty much all they're doing is putting a coating on the outside of the vegetables. So, once you wash that off, which I do recommend washing them, even if you have organic, but always wash them off to be able to make sure you're getting anything off of the outside. But it's pretty much the same thing. So if you have an eggplant or I don't know, broccoli or something like that, the organic version and the conventional version will both cook at the exact same time. All right, our next one, Steve. Since going plant-based or vegan, I have no need for my grill. How can a vegan or plant-based eater utilize a grill? Is it even worth it? I don't think so. Am I wrong? I would say you're wrong on that one, Steve. No offense. But yeah, you can definitely use your grill. There are a host of wonderful things to be able to do on the grill. I typically do most of my grilling in the summertime just because it's more pleasant outside and it's great as an, I don't want to say an outdoor kitchen because I don't have an outdoor kitchen, but a grill is part of that outdoor kitchen. So it's nice to be able to be outside and cook at the same time. Now I'll do a host of different things beyond just like, your regular veggie burgers and stuff like that. But I'll do like grilled asparagus on it. I'll do different grilled vegetables on it as well. We have a couple classes that cover veggie grilling in our Plant-Based Pro and Plants Plus class. Both of those have a nice grilling section that Barton Seaver did for us to be able to show different ways to be able to cook those veggies. Fruits are also another wonderful thing to be able to grill. Doing different like things like pineapple or mango, things like that, actually pulls out the natural sugars and starts to caramelize them when they're on the grill, and they just add a whole different dynamic flavor profile to fruits when you grill them as well. Now, beyond just doing those kind of standard things too, you can also think about it as other, ways. You can actually use your grill as a pseudo pizza oven as well. So doing like grilled flatbreads and things like that. Wonderful ways to be able to add a different dynamic of flavor by putting them on the grill to be able to get that natural caramelization that comes out and pulls sugars out, or just putting a little bit of char on something can change the flavor profile on something. Now, if you are finding that you're not using your grill a ton, that's okay. You don't have to keep the outdoor grill. They also sell little tiny versions that you can do something on the inside. A lot of people are familiar with that George Foreman grill. They have many different types of things like that nowadays that you can actually use inside to be able to do as a grill, or a grill plate that you can actually use inside as well. So if you're just tired of having the large style grill in the backyard or something like that, a smaller indoor version will work as well if you're not using it as much. But it is nice to be able to have them around just for some of those things. But I do have to say I don't use my grill that often. So it's really a personal preference to you to be able to see. But I tell you what, when I do have it, I'm glad I do, because there are certain dishes that just are accentuated a little bit by it. So I hope that helps. Thanks, Steve. All right, another one from Steve here is a dietitian or nutritionist, which is more aligned with plant-based or vegan diets? Well, the big difference between a dietitian and nutritionist is the dietitian actually goes to a school. Usually a registered dietitian is going to school or college and getting an actual degree, and they have the RD that's actually behind their name. Now, nutritionists can go to school, but they're typically a little more self-taught, or they follow their own path as well. You can get a degree as a nutritionist, but doesn't have the letters behind it like a doctor would, like an RD. So the registered dietitian is definitely going to have a little bit more schooling and more experience in that. Not saying that that's the case in all cases, right? Some nutritionists really do a ton of work and really get to the level of an RD as well. They just don't have the little numbers or letters behind their name as well. So that's kind of the difference between the two of them. Now, which is more aligned with plant-based or vegan diets? It really depends on the person, right? So even registered dietitians sometimes ignore the facts of the benefits of plant-based diets. More and more now, you're seeing that registered dietitians are completely aligned with whole food plant-based diets, especially in the last 5 years. If you see graduates just coming out of school, like a registered dietitian school or something like that, you're going to see that they're really, really well aligned with plant-based, whole food diets as well. Now, nutritionists, because they're studying on their own, can kind of veer depending on their own studies as well. But more in line, the basic knowledge is going to say that the plant-based vegan diets are definitely healthier for you, but a nutritionist can definitely take it as more of a take it or leave it, where the registered dietitian is basing it on pure fact and the studies that they've gone through. So the answer is kind of both, right? So depending on who you're seeing, and part of that is the nutritionist aspect, is finding somebody who aligns with the goals that you are currently working towards as well. An RD, you might need to do that a little bit, but more, by and large, more registered dietitians are finding that whole food plant-based diets are really the way to go, and that's what they're preaching. So I hope that helps, Steve. All right, another one from Steve here. Vegan chicken patties and black bean burgers. I normally eat these at least once a week. I've read in vegan books say to avoid if possible. What are your thoughts about adding these foods to a vegan or plant-based diet? That's a great question, and this is completely a personal preference, Steve. So, the vegan chicken patties are typically pretty darn processed. There's a lot of processing that happens to the plants to be able to make them taste like chicken, and then they're breaded as well, so they have a coating of depending, we're not really sure what that is depending on the patty you're actually getting as well. Now, black bean burgers, typically a little less processed, but it depends on the burger. I actually love to make my black bean burgers at home from scratch. We actually have a couple recipes on Ruby for those as well too. But if you're picking a really clean label for your black bean burgers, what I mean by clean is a very short ingredient list, and everything on that label your great grandmother could pronounce. Like if you're picking black bean burgers like that are packaged, then that's much, much better. The chicken patties, I haven't found a real clean label chicken patty, vegan chicken patty to say. So I would probably go with the black bean burger, and I actually do. Once a week, we have a burger night. It's kind of the easy cook night for our family, and black bean burgers are one of our go-tos. And we serve them in different ways. We can do them on buns or on salads or all kinds of different things as well. But the black bean burgers are typically 5 ingredients or less, and they're baked, so they're not deep fried or anything like that as well. But it's a really good option to be able to look for that. And if you're making them yourself, you know exactly what's in them. But again, if you're going to buy them, just make sure that it has a short ingredient list and as clean as possible. So, about avoiding those things, that's really up to you. A lot of people want to go strictly whole food plant-based, and if you're trying to stay whole food, the chicken patty is not going to do that for you. But a lot of people like the vegan chicken patties because it's kind of a comfort food as well. And as long as you're doing it, in moderation, that's totally fine. But that's really up to you on how often you want to do that, or if you want to do it at all. So I hope that helps. All right. Here's from Dr. Jacqueline Zielinski. I need to know how often to sharpen my knives myself and how often to use a professional. It appears to me that every chef has an opinion about what chef knives are best and about sharpening them. That's kind of true. And please elaborate on this vital basic subject. That's a great question, Dr. Jacqueline. So let's see, the best knife. Let's just start with that. The best knife is a sharp one. Everybody can tell you that this knife is going to be the best one they make, but it's really kind of a personal preference. I like to always pick a knife that has a tang, a full tang to it. So that means that the metal that makes up the blade actually goes through the handle as well. So you can actually see there's like the metal going around the outside of the handle as well. That actually just makes it so it's a safer knife. It's not going to break off at the end of that as well. So that's really one component I always tell people to look for in a knife, is to make sure that there's a full tang that goes through the entire handle as well. Now, beyond that, the best knife is a sharp one, right? So the sharper we keep our knives, the better they are. And a lot of kitchens and a lot of restaurants, one of the first things they do if you're applying as a chef is they tell you to bring out your chef knife and see how sharp it is. And if it's not sharp, they might not hire you, because those are the tools of the trade, and that's what we use. Now, how often you should sharpen your knife is a completely person-to-person thing, because it all depends on what you're cooking and how often you cook. So if you're using your knife a lot every single day, if you're a professional and say you're making meals for 1,000 people every single day, you're going to have to sharpen your knife a lot. I think when I was doing the top of my catering, at the top of my restaurant work, I was probably sharpening my knife at least every 2 to 3 weeks. Because I could start to feel it get dull quick. But that was because I was chopping like hundreds of onions a day, or hundreds of ingredients, and just going through lots and lots and lots of cooking. So my knife naturally would get duller the more I would use it. Now, home cooks in general have a much wider window, because you're not cooking thousands of items every single day, or chopping up those items every single day. So on average, most home cooks will sharpen their knife about every 4 to 6 months, depending on how often you're cooking in the kitchen as well. Now, that again, it could be sooner than that, or it could be later than that. But really, the best test is the knife. Are you finding that you're having to push it through the actual product, like say a tomato? Does it slice right through the tomato, or does it push down on the skin before it actually gets through it? Now, that's a pretty good sign you want to sharpen your knife at that point. So anytime you start to feel that, that's the way to go. The other thing is, when we're talking about, sharpening a knife, I always bring up using a steel at first. So not just sharpening, but actually honing the knife. So there's a honing tool. It's kind of a long tool that's usually diamond plated or has some kind of plating on it. And you will take your knife across it back and forth. And what that's actually doing is when you're using your knife, it basically the knife tip will start to curve down on the bottom a little bit like this. And this honing tool knocks it off so it's more straight. It's a little hard to visualize on that, but I'll just use my phone for an example, right? So if my blade, if you're looking at it straight on like this, it'll actually start to curve down a little bit, but using that honing tool will knock it off so it's sharp on the bottom of that as well. Now, it's not sharpening it. What it's doing is taking that little curve and putting it back into place. So you're still getting that kind of V-tip at the end instead of having it curve over to one side like that. So using a honing tool will actually, to knock it off so it's really, has that sharp edge at the very end is great. But a lot of times it's actually taking off a little bit of the top edge too. So it is, making it a little less dull, but it's definitely sharper than if it was just curved over like this. So I actually use a honing tool almost every time I cook. It's one of the first things I do when I get into a kitchen is I'll pull out my knife and then the honing tool to sharpen it really quick. And in all honesty, at my home kitchen, I probably do that every 4 days or so. But if I'm doing it professionally and I'm in a kitchen, I'm going to do it pretty much every single day that I pick up a knife. Now that will keep your blade much sharper for much, much longer. And you continue to do that like every 4 days or, every so often to be able to make that happen. Now that will actually, you'll see it'll cut through that tomato really, really easily. But if it stops doing that after using the honing tool, that's when you want to sharpen again. Now, there are a couple different ways to be able to sharpen your knife. Using a stone, a wet stone, is probably one of the best ways to do it. You can also use an electric sharpener as well, but those can tend to take a lot off or leave marks, depending on your knives as well, too. Now, I do those 100% of the time. I don't take my knives to get professionally sharpened because I'm used to doing it in either using a whetstone or an electric sharpener myself. But I know many people that take them to professionals, especially if you have like a lot of knives you need to get done. But I typically just pick it out a date, every couple of months where I'm going to go in and just sharpen every single knife in my knife block. Just to make sure that everything's really, really nice. Now, again, I cook quite often, so every couple of months I have to sharpen them, but on average, it's about 4 to 6 months for everybody. I hope that helps a little bit. All right, so Laura, I'm aware of the value of and importance of using a chef knife when cutting food, but when it comes to cutting smaller ingredients like garlic, cherry tomatoes, wouldn't a smaller knife, like a paring knife, do the job while also being safer? So safer might not be the best way to explain that, but part of that is just doing what's comfortable for you, right? So I pretty much use a chef knife for everything. Like when I use a paring knife, it is much smaller work. Now for cherry tomatoes, yeah, like I would probably use a paring knife to be able to do those. And I actually use a trick where I'll take 2 plates and put them over, I'll have like the cherry tomatoes on my plate, and I'll put the other plate on top, and then I'll take my knife and cut through them. Now that's actually use a serrated knife because that way I can have a ton of tomatoes all at once by using that technique. So I'll actually use like a bread, serrated knife to be able to do that. But paring knives are usually used to do small, intricate work. So if I'm going to do something like radishes, I'm gonna make like radish flowers or something like that. Or if I'm peeling potatoes or something like that, I'll use my paring knife as well. Now the garlic is the only one that I'm kind of like, I might use an actual chef knife on that. And that's primarily because when you smash your garlic, so you want to put your garlic on your cutting board and then turn your knife to the side and then smash it on top. So it's just kind of flays out that garlic really well. And then it's just really easy to chop after that. Now you can't quite do that with a paring knife. You have to have the wide edge of a chef knife. So that's the only part that I'm like, you might want to use a chef knife for that. But really, I mean, if the paring knife feels better for you for doing the tomatoes and smaller stuff like that, that's totally fine. There's definitely a use for each one of those knives, but part of it is just what feels comfortable to you. When I started building the class for Jacques Pepin, I was always surprised that he was always using these little tiny knives, and he uses them for a lot of different things. And Jacques Pepin has been one of the leading chefs for a very long time. but he doesn't use a chef knife all the time. And part of that is just because it really is what's comfortable to you. And you'll see that different trends kind of happen through the years for knives as well. A lot of times people use much thinner knives, but the chef knife for me is actually the go-to all the time. It's the tool that I use 99% of the time, and the paring knife comes in second. But do what feels comfortable to you. Thanks for the question, Laura. All right, so Sakia, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that. Any ideas to cook wild rice? So yeah, wild rice definitely is going to be a little bit different to cook. There are typically instructions on how to do the different grains that you're getting because there are different kinds of wild rice. So I can't give you an exact answer on like, here's the exact amount of ratio of water and cooking time, because really depending on where you're getting it and what kind of rice, because there's a huge variety of different wild rices. But it does take longer to cook. You typically, when it's done, you'll see the rice kind of open up and bloom up a little bit. So it's one of those rices you definitely have to keep an eye on, kind of like beans. Sometimes beans never quite cook the same way, and aren't as fast as like the label says. But wild rice is typically one of those that you do have to keep an eye on to be able to make sure that it's cooking properly and cooking all the way. I like it when it starts to bloom out a little bit like that because it softens it up. Some people like it where it's like right before it blooms, so you still have a big toothy feel on it as well. But I wish there was a better, very clear answer for that, but it really depends on the variety of rice you're using. Aravind, so I'm exploring dehydrating vegetables and greens to enjoy them as snacks, unsalted. What are some recipe suggestions, including entry-level equipment needed to do this? Well, that's great. Dehydrating is a lot of fun, and really depending on what your interests are in it, you can go a huge variety of different ways. But if you're going with greens, actually one of my favorites to do is kale chips. And kale chips are a great thing. Like my kids even love them as snacks, and they're toddlers, So basically what I do for kale is I'm going to wash the kale and then tear them off into bite-sized pieces. And then I'm going to make a cashew cream, very much like our cashew bechamel or something like that we use in some of the courses. So it's basically soaking cashews overnight and then blending them up after you dump the water, blend them up with a little bit of lemon juice and maybe some champagne vinegar, maybe like half a lemon and tablespoon or two of champagne vinegar, and then add your seasonings to that after you blend it all. Once it gets a little smooth, you'll probably need a little water to get it smooth, but then add your seasonings. If you want like a chipotle version, put some chipotle powder in there, maybe a little garlic powder, and you can go a variety of ways. I've even made like a ranch style, that my wife loved. She grew up in the Midwest, and that was one of the flavor profiles she loved. So I basically copied a ranch style and did it with a cashew cream instead. And then you basically mush it all into your kale, and then put it in the dehydrator. Now, a lot of people don't have dehydrators, which you don't actually need. You'll find that you can actually put, if it's a gas oven, you can actually put it right into your oven and just keep it off and keep it in there for about 24 to 48 hours, and it'll help dehydrate as well. I haven't done that for a long time, and I knew it took longer than it needed, but a dehydrator is probably the best way to be able to go. Now, there are a lot of different versions of dehydrators. There are really, really expensive ones, and there are ones that don't cost a lot. And the ones that don't cost a lot are perfect for home use. If you're not doing it professionally in catering kitchens and stuff like that, a home dehydrator can cost you less than $50. And that's really a good way to be able to start. So putting it in your kale chips like that into a dehydrator for 24 hours is going to get them really, really, really crispy. Now, if you're doing other things, other vegetables, part of that is just kind of doing a little bit of marinade on them, depending on what you're using them for. But exploring with flavor profiles is wonderful to be able to do with those. I actually love doing some of the fruit pastes that you can actually make into like the fruit poles and stuff like that. And then you can also do other great crusts, like raw crusts, like a pizza crust or crackers are really fun things to be able to do. Maybe like a little bit of flaxseed and some pepper, ground up, and you can do a lot of fun things with dehydrating. So have fun with that, Irvine. All right, so Kimmy Alyssa, I'd love to start and or strengthen the movement for chefs to embrace their power to help improve people's health with every dish they create. I love this. Is there something like that in motion, or can we begin it? Yes, yes, let's begin it, Kimmy. I love this. So yeah, there are a lot of ways for chefs to really embrace their power to help improve health. There are a lot of people out there doing a lot of different things now to be able to help that. People, doing blogs, vlogs, all kinds of things like that as well. But one of the ways I find personally to really help in the best way is to help with kids and really get them to have a good understanding of what food is, where it comes from, and the effects it has on our environments as well. There The generation that's coming up now is really food centric. They're really interested in it. There are a lot of young kids now that grew up with chefs as entertainers instead of cartoons, which is pretty wild to see. And so they look up to chefs a lot. They want to know about where their ingredients are from. They want to know how they're grown. I used to work for an organization that gave away school gardens, and it was amazing to be able to see the education that these kids were getting specifically just from growing a fruit or a vegetable because they knew exactly where it came from. Like that's probably one of the best ways that you can really help improve people's health is to be able to help in some of those ways. And cooking classes for kids, always a fun thing to be able to do as well. You don't have to charge for them. I used to do them all the time where I'd, basically get groups of kids together and show them how to do little fun things that they could all create. And that could be something from just how to roll sushi, from pre-cut ingredients to be able to have them do, or how to make a chili where everybody adds a certain ingredient into it and it cooks down in something like a crock pot or something like that. But there are a host of different ways to be able to do this, and I love that you have this passion around that. And I really, wishing you the best in it because there's a lot of different ways to be able to help. Those are just a few, but hopefully that leads you in the right direction. All right, so Grace, please answer. How do I cook black beans until they're soft? They stay hard. I've tried soaking them overnight, added kombu. Thank you for your response. Yeah, Grace, black beans are one of those beans that they're not, they're just like the wild rice. They're not always going to come out the same because each one of those little, beans is very unique to its own. So they're not all going to cook at the exact same time. A lot of times people will use, like I don't use like the Instapots to do beans specifically because of that. Because Instapots, you set an exact timer on it, and then when it's done, it stops cooking. And black beans don't work that way. They're very non-compliant, right? So they're just like, they're the rebel of beans. Kombu and soaking them overnight is a super good start. I do that every time I'm going to cook black beans. So I'm going to soak them overnight and I'm going to drain off the water that's in them, start with new water, add kombu to the pot, and then bring it to a boil and down to a simmer and cook it for a while, a long time. And the key to cooking black beans, and it really is, the key is I love to do it in a pot on a stove to start off. I do love to be able to do the kombu, but the key is really keeping an eye on it and letting it go to the point where you see the beans are done, tasting them as they go. There's real no exact science to it, like this is the exact number of minutes you need to do or number of seconds to cook it, depending on the altitude you're in as well. There's all kinds of different things that are out there. So again, I always say the black beans are kind of the renegade of the beans. They don't like listening to the rules, right? So, keeping them on your stovetop and keeping them on there for a while, and keep tasting them until they're all done. And don't just taste one, taste like a whole spoonful, because each one of those little beans is going to be different. And the bigger the spoonful you get, the more you're going to be able to see if they're no longer hard and they actually get soft in the way we want them. So I wish I could have an exact answer for it, but there isn't one for that. Black beans, definitely that renegade bean. So cook them on a stove top and keep an eye on them and let them go longer than sometimes recommended. All right, so Steve, wife and I went plant-based this year. We normally host Thanksgiving, and she wants to continue the same animal products she made before we switched our diet. Do you have a recommendation how we can entertain guests and still stay true to our diet? Yeah, so I think that's two questions. If she wants to cook meat and the animal products that she used to, if that's a passion of hers, I would let her do it. Because sometimes people and the rest of our family aren't quite ready to make that switch over. And if you're doing it for a holiday event, sometimes that can be a little odd for them, not for you. But for them, they might show up and they might be full on carnivores and show up and I was like, where's the meat on this table? I'm not going to like anything. Now, that being said, I can't tell you how many times I've hosted events where everybody was like, holy cow, I didn't realize there was no meat on this table at all. Now, part of that is, being kind of unique and looking for different flavor profiles that maybe some of your guests are looking for. So my family, for holiday events, we have a mix of meat eaters and non-meat eaters. Over the years, it's been 25 years or so since I've eaten meat, probably longer than that. But over the years, you'll see my family has gone more towards the plant-based style, where before I was just eating side dishes at the beginning. But the longer everybody saw, we all cooked together, the more they started going towards the plant-based as well. And so now for something like Thanksgiving, when they might cook like a small, like a quail or something like that, and it's off to the side and maybe one person eats that one thing. Now, that's okay, but that's again personal preference. I didn't have to cook it, so I'm not worried about it. If that's what they do for their Thanksgiving, and that's what they, that's part of their tradition, that's fine. But what I always do is look for really nice, decadent dishes that are plant-based that everybody's going to go for first, and they're going to forget about any of the animal products as well. If you look through the dashboard on Ruby, you'll find the live events, and you can go through and look through the archive of live events. And if you look at my name, Dan Marek, you'll see that I've done a couple of these holiday events where it's holiday cooking. I know we just did one recently too, before the holidays, where Fran and Barton did some of the events as well. So each one of those has got some great plant-based dishes to be able to look at. The Mushroom Wellington is one that's very popular that I like to do every year for the holidays. And it's not a ton of work actually, which is nice. So the key for doing the plant-based diets for those holidays is look for things that everybody's going to love. It's okay to go a little more decadent for the holidays than you would on your normal meals, because it is the holidays. You want it to be something that's memorable and be like, you look forward to every year, right? And so if you have those kinds of dishes what people are looking forward to every year, they're going to completely forget about the animals that are missing off of the table, hopefully. So I hope that helps a little bit. Part of that is just the transition for your family and for your guests as well, and just trying to make everybody comfortable in that transition. I hope that helps, Steve. Pablo, hi, Chef Dan. I've been a wine aficionado for a number of years. How do I incorporate this passion into my new plant-based way of life? Thanks, Pablo. So a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of wines are actually not vegan. They typically will use something like an egg yolk or a rennet or animal, even milks and stuff to be able to get some of the solids that they can't get out of wine by using those animal products to get out of those wines. So doing a little bit of research helps a lot. There was recently an article on the Wine Aficionado, which we'll post here. It's actually what is vegan wine and how do you actually find it. It was in Decanter magazine, I think it was. And that's actually a really good kind of explanation of wines and looking for vegan wines as well. A lot of manufacturers now are realizing that there are a lot of people looking for wines that have no animal products in them. In fact, Guinness actually just switched their recipe like after a very long time of making it the same way, where Guinness is now vegan, whereas just 5 years ago it wasn't. But they're just getting rid of the animal product and the rennets they were using to be able to separate out any particles that were left over in them as well. That's the same thing with the wines. You'll see a lot of manufacturers are starting to veganize their wine just by switching the animal or the product that they're using. Instead of using an animal-based product, they'll go with like a pea protein instead of an egg or something like that. But unfortunately, they don't usually put like the label on it saying there's animal product in this wine, because there's not an ingredient label typically on it. And rennet is one of those things that's pretty small to be able to put on those. So doing a little bit of research on your wines is really the best way to go. What I do is I typically have like a house wine that I find that I like. I'll research some of them, taste a couple of ones from that certain year, and then go with that wine. It's kind of a house wine. So I just know it's safe every time, and I know the flavor profiles. And I'll typically go with a couple of reds and a white to be able to, pair with different dishes depending on the seasons too. But yeah, if you are going 100% plant-based, you definitely have to start researching your wines and sometimes beers, but not often as much on beers. But wines are one of those you want to be able to take a look at. So Pablo, continue to be that an aficionado. That's wonderful. And the more education you get, always share it as well. I think that the more people ask for, the labels to say if it's a vegan or plant-based wine, people might actually start doing that on wine bottles. So hopefully that helps out. Arvand. So there was a recommendation from someone that spinach should not be smoothied because it can use calcium to bind and cause kidney stones over time of continuous consumption. Do you agree with this? And have you known this to happen? So I'm a chef, not a doctor, so that's actually not a question I can really answer into it. I've heard of, some kind of combinations with spinach, and calcium, but thought it was, I'm not sure it was to bind. But either way, I'm not qualified to answer that question. That's definitely something you want to talk to a doctor about. I've personally not had anything happen in my family or known anybody that's happened to, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So that's a question you need to consult a doctor or maybe a registered dietitian on as well. Sorry, can't give you the answer on that one, Arvin. So Lisa, what is the best way to achieve caramelization when sauteing? I love browning and caramelizing veggies, and I'm having a hard time when not using oil. Save our ship, SOS. So the best way to achieve caramelization is letting it sit a little bit, right? So depending on the pan you're using, if you're using a non-stick pan, it's harder to see. But if you're using like a stainless steel pan, you can see it a lot quicker. And it's the browning that happens on the bottom of the pan. And a lot of people don't realize that that brown is actually the caramelization. Those are the natural sugars that are just sticking to the pan. Now the trick is to deglaze the pan. And deglazing is just a fancy word for rinsing it with water. So for our onion example, if you're, you take sliced onions and you get your pan up to a medium high heatish, you put a drop of water into it, you should start to see that water kind of beat up a bit. And that's actually the perfect time to be able to put your onions into it. You put the onions in, let them sit for a minute, and then if you move them a little bit, you'll start to see a little brown underneath that. That's actually a great time to deglaze with just maybe a tablespoon or two of water to be able to get the brown off of the pan back onto the onions. One of the old chef adages is you never leave brown on the bottom of the pan because that's where all the flavor is. It's so true. It's actually all that caramelization is where the natural sugars and the big flavors are coming out. So you definitely don't want to leave that stuff on the bottom of the pan. So deglazing just with a little bit of water will actually bring those sugars and coat the onion again, and it'll start to cook the other sides of it as well too. And then you can just do that again, a couple different times to be able to get the true caramelization down. Now, if you're looking for a caramelization that's like deep, deep brown, you'll have to do this process a number of times. If you're just wanting a light caramelization on it, just a couple times will be fine. But that's really the best way to be able to get that caramelization down on different vegetables too. You can do it on all kinds of different ones. I once did a cooking demonstration for a woman. Where was I at? I think this was in Denver. And she watched the demonstration and then she contacted me 6 months later and told me she lost 40 pounds. I was like, wow, how did you do that? And she's like, I didn't listen to everything you did, but I did listen to not cooking with oil. And so she still ate chicken and things like that too, but she did it with no oil, and she lost 40 pounds in that 6 months, which is pretty amazing. But the same thing she was doing, she was getting a little bit of caramelization on the bottom of her meats even, and just using the water to deglaze, and it basically unstuck the chicken off of it and still had a brown edge on it. Well, I haven't cooked chicken in like over 25 years, as I've said, but to know that that actually works on meat products too is a pretty cool thing. But for vegetables, it's a much easier process. And, doing that with just a little bit of water or vegetable stock can really change the flavor profile on certain things too. So I hope that does help a little bit. All right, Lisa, so any good ideas for plant-based breakfasts? I love to do a brunch and want to wow my book club. They know I'm all taking the Ruby plant-based course. So the plant-based course actually has some great breakfast recipes in it. Like this morning, I did breakfast tacos, but I'm from Texas. We do breakfast tacos a lot. But I did it with tofu scramble, and my tofu scrambles typically just like a quarter of an onion and a handful of mushrooms, and I'll saute those to get them caramelized, and then I'll crumble in my tofu, a little bit of garlic powder, and then turmeric and salt and pepper, and barely any salt. Because too much salt will actually bring the turmeric out more. I just don't use salt much, but that's actually one of my go-tos. Now, if you're looking to really kind of go that extra step, there's a whole lot of things, especially for brunch, which people like to do a little more decadent things. So you could do something like do a vegan hollandaise and put that over maybe a tofu scramble on top of an English muffin, and maybe do, you could do like a shiitake or a portobello mushroom that you have where you smoke it and do like a bacon kind of version out of it. I do that often with shiitake mushrooms, but I'll basically, what that mixes is a little bit of tamari, smoked salt, or you could use liquid smoke as well. I'll add some paprika and let's see, a little garlic powder and a little onion powder. And that's it. You put it in the oven in a sheet pan for 40 minutes, flipping it halfway through, and you typically have to scrape the mushroom off the bottom. But if you do that and you put that on like an English muffin, the mushrooms, a little bit of tofu scramble, and a nice hollandaise, and maybe a tomato on there in season, a little garnish on top of greens. That sounds like a pretty darn good brunch to me. So look around for different ingredients or different examples of plant-based brunches. There's a lot of different ways to be able to do them, depending on how decadent and how much time you want to spend. But if you really want to wow them, you might want to go with something a little bit different on that as well too. But yeah, the breakfast tacos are always my go-to. But if you want to go fancier, try something like I guess that would be like a Benedict, like a vegan Benedict. All right. Shakia, hi chef. How do you select a knife as a beginner to start practicing? Should we buy the entire kit or a particular knife? That's a great question. So depending on the kit, right? If you're a plant-based chef, there are some knives you're just not ever going to use. You're not going to use like a boning knife or a filleting knife as much as well. The one knife that I would recommend is buying a chef knife, which is typically 8 to 10 inches long. Typically, it's about 8 to 10 inches long. You don't have to spend a ton of money on it. One of the most important things is being able to feel it, right? So there are a lot of specialty stores out there that will let you try out their knives on a cutting board just to be able to see how they feel in your hand. That doesn't mean you have to buy them from them as well. So you might find it somewhere cheaper, but you can at least try them at some place. So I highly recommend going to a place where you can actually hold the knife in your hand and feel how the handle feels in your hand. It should feel comfortable. Now, when you're practicing with it at the store, make sure you're putting a bit of pressure on it, because there is a certain point on a knife, and I wish I had one in my hand right now, but there's something called a chef callus where you get right here, and it's where you're holding your knife. You basically put one finger on one side, and then put the other finger on the blade like this, right? And then I'm holding my handle curved like that. So what happens is sometimes that blade can go up and hit this part of your finger as you're holding it like that when you're chopping. So that's one of those areas to be able to kind of feel if it's comfortable hitting you right here, but more importantly, how it feels directly in your hand. And that's really one of the best ways to be able to start picking a knife, especially for a beginner. Now, you will need other knives down the road, but pretty much your chef knife partnered with a good like bread serrated knife, and then a smaller paring knife should pretty much get you through a good while. Now, there are other specialty knives that you might need over the years, but those 3 knives will pretty much do everything you need them to. Whenever I'm traveling, those are the 3 knives I take with me everywhere, and I don't need anything else. I might need others, but it's usually to share them with somebody else if I'm in a kitchen. All right, so Jerry Ann, hello chef, do you have a good whole food plant-based, no oil pumpkin custard recipe? I don't actually. Let's see, a pumpkin, like I could probably come up with one off the top of my head, but if you're doing whole food, plant-based, and no oil, pumpkin custard. So let's see, I would probably go something a little more decadent with that, but you might not want to. I'd probably go with like a coconut milk, and then the pumpkin, and then blend up some other things to be able to go into them. So what I would use is probably dates. I'd soak the dates maybe for 4 hours-ish, put dates in the bottom of a cup, and then just top them off with a little bit of water, and then blend them up with your blender until they become a paste. Now you can take that paste and use it to sweeten something like the pumpkin. So you can take a can of pumpkin and your can of coconut milk, and then put in your dates into that, a little pumpkin spice if you want to as well, and blend that entire thing up, and it might come out to the custard consistency you're looking for. I might want to change the consistency a little bit, but not even trying that recipe, just literally kind of coming up with it off the top of my head, that would probably be a good start. Otherwise, try Googling some stuff and see what you come up with. But I don't have one off the top of my head that I have right now. All right, so from Aravid, with so many dishes out there, so many diets out there, such as keto, low carb, high fat, high protein, high carb, etc., it can be difficult to know what to follow for your optimum health. What diet or eating pattern do you follow yourself? That's a great ending to your question, because I thought you were going to ask what I recommend for you. Now, I tell everybody that your diet is like a fingerprint. It's completely unique to you. Now, it doesn't matter if your brother or sister grew up right alongside of you. Their eating styles could be completely different from you, just depending on where you guys both went after you grew up and went out of the house. Diets are completely situational to every single person, and just because where we all grow up and the ingredients that are available to us, the food and the cooking styles that are available to us can really be different for everybody. Now, me personally, I'm glad you ended with that, because I can't recommend a certain diet for any one person because everybody's completely different. But the diet pattern that I follow myself is definitely more whole food, plant-based diet. Now, I do use oil, but I use it very sparingly. I also use salt unbelievably sparingly. I barely use salt at all, but I will use oil to be able to kind of get things going fast. Now, that doesn't mean I use it all the time. And if I do use it, I'm typically going to use it in like one of the spray oils where you have to pump the top and spray it out. And that way I'm not using a lot of it. I used to always tell people, if you are going to use oil, put a drop in the bottom of your pan and then wipe the pan down to be able to get the excess oil out. Because really what most people are using oil for is to create a non-stick surface. And if you're not caring about the flavor of the oil at all, that's pretty much what you're using it for, right? So I try to go very low oil on things and then keep whole food plant-based. Now, that means I cook a lot. Now, as a chef, that'd probably be expected, but I mean, I cook every single meal for us pretty much every single week. We don't go out to eat that often. We didn't really before the pandemic either. And part of that is because the more you cook at home, you'll find that the ingredients you can pick out every single thing that you actually is in all of your dishes, which is great. And I actually like to know all of those things. So if I'm going to eat something at a restaurant, it could easily be a huge calorie meal, and I don't know 100% of all the ingredients are in it. So I typically cook all of our dishes at home as well. Now, do we have shortcuts? Yes, we totally do have shortcut nights. There might be a night where I'm working late and my wife, instead of having to cook and watch the kids, will do something quick and easy like a veggie burger night, like I talked about. We have kind of two cheat nights we use. One of them is a pizza night and one of them is a veggie burger night. Now, most times we're actually going to use a house-made veggie burger to be able to make it again. So it's really, easy to be able to figure out exactly all the ingredients in it, and we're keeping it safe, if you will. And if we do buy something like a veggie burger, it's typically, it used to be Amy's, but we've switched up recently. But going with a kind of a cleaner, brand on those as well too. So what I actually follow is a whole food plant-based diet with a little bit of oil in it to be able to make that answer a little bit shorter there. So hope that helps. Arvand as well. So for sugar control, what are the best sources of carbohydrates? Vegan only. So for sugar control, what are the best source of carbohydrates? Not 100% sure how to answer that question. And I think what you're trying to do is make sure you're not getting a lot of sugar from the carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are found in most vegetables. So, as long as you're keeping them to a whole grain or, a whole grain or actual vegetables, those are definitely going to be the better carbohydrate to go to. For sugar control, I'm not 100% sure where to answer on that one as well. But if you're looking for best source of carbohydrates, always look for those whole grains or just the actual fruit or vegetable itself. I'm not 100% sure if that's what you're asking, but I'll stick with that. So, Natalie, hello, and thank you very much for this event. My grandpa was a baker, and since the age of 4, I've been baking. Unfortunately, as a vegan, I'm not pleased with the egg replacer, aquafaba bananas. I hate the taste. Chia seeds, they make the cake very hard. That will happen. Natalie. Okay, so there are a host of different ways to be able to do an egg replacer in vegan recipes. I'll post a link of one, just finding one on the web here real quick. But part of this is experimentation. And baking is the hardest part, I think, in switching to a whole food plant-based diet because there hasn't been a ton of great work in it. Now, with the exception, Fran, who is the director of plant-based desserts for Ruby, I think that's her title, is an amazing resource for this. So definitely go into the live links here and do look up some of the stuff that she's listed on, because I know there are some store-bought brands that actually work really well for egg replacers and for butters actually. And there's different kinds for different things that you're going to cook. Really, for baking though, it's an experimentation game that people have been playing for a bit to be able to get these exact flavor profiles they're looking for. But Fran has actually done a wonderful job on this. So if you're really looking to do more baking, I might want to check out Fran's class that we offer through Ruby as well. But for egg replacers, yeah, there's a list here that you'll see is kind of vegan egg substitutes, but depending on what you're cooking, some of them work and some of them don't. But I would definitely inquiry Fran on that too. Look up some of her live events, and that will probably help you with that adventure, which it's a fun one. All right, so Arvan, what do you eat for breakfast on a typical day? So I switch it off, so I get up with my toddlers in the morning and they will typically do like a fig bar kind of a thing and then fresh fruit. We'll do oatmeal a lot. We'll, chop up apples into little tiny pieces with some cinnamon and maybe some almond milk and oats. And then we will also, like I said, the veggie tacos are pretty common for me. Like I do love veggie tacos. So, doing like a tofu scramble is pretty much my go-to 100% of the time. Not 100% of the time, but 90% of the time. But other veggies in the morning are actually great to be able to do those too. And why do I like those? Well, they're kind of easy. You can just fold them up and you can take them anywhere. So if I'm chasing after the kids doing different things, I can still be eating my breakfast. But that's typically what I'm going to do is either veggie tacos, oatmeal, fresh fruit isn't always, it's 100% on the plate every single morning. And that's a mix between what's in season. Sometimes it's harder to find those fresh fruits in season, but they're typically going to be like, strawberries and blueberries and grapes and raspberries to be able to kind of get that started. And my kids love it, and it's one of the first things they go to eat as well. And they'll eat their breakfast tacos too, but typically a little half a taco or something with a little bit of, pico de gallo or something on it to just be able to change it up. All right, so Yvonne, what is the ideal room temperature to ferment cashew cheese? That's a great question. I have not seen that on this platform yet. Now, typically when you're fermenting a cashew, I've done it for different dishes before. A room temperature at about 72 degrees is ideal. Now, depending on the cheese that you're doing, I think you might be talking about one of the rolled cheeses that we offer through. Actually, no, those are macadamia nuts. But yeah, so anytime I've actually done the cashew cheese, I'm usually doing it at a room temperature of about 72 degrees in kind of a dark area, so I've usually done it, kind of walk-in areas, but, keeping it kind of, yeah, about 72 degrees is what that is. A walk-in refrigerator is actually too cold now that I'm thinking about it, but to ferment it, you'd keep it out on the counter at a room temperature. So 72 degrees is about that, area that I try to aim for. Hope that helps. Jenny, I now use a forks over knives recipe for veg stock, but was using a pressure cooker recipe and noticed it would separate when refrigerated. What causes? What does it mean? Is it a very inferior stock? I'm not sure which forks over knives recipe for stock you're talking about, but it's interesting that it's separating on you. And I think, because typically when you're separating, that means that the oil is separating or the fat is rising to the top, which happens with any stock that has fat in it. And I'm pretty sure forks over knives wouldn't give you one that had oil in it, and they definitely wouldn't give you one that had meat in it. So I think probably what's happening is you're seeing some of the particles probably settle to the bottom of your stock. And what that basically means is when you're making your stock and you're putting it through the strainer, your strainer's not catching all the particles that would actually go through that. And when it sits in, like, say, a mason jar or a bell jar or something like that, or ball jar, what happens, you'll see the little particles start to come to the bottom of the jar. It's actually pretty normal to happen. Usually, I mean, I make fresh stock almost every week. It's pretty rare I don't make a vegetable stock or have a big jar of stock in my fridge. And I do it out of scraps, to be completely honest, most of the time. If I'm doing something like a dashi, I'll do it, on the fly from scratch. But primarily, though, I'm not going to filter it the whole way either. And when I take it out, I'm basically going to shake the jar up to be able to get all those little specks of vegetables to be able to kind of coat through the entire thing. And my stocks are typically a little more brown than yellow because of that. But if you want to not have that happen and you want a very clean, very glossy, very, super clean stock, you'll have to, basically filter it more. And so instead of just going through your strainer, you'll also probably have to go through a cheesecloth, and probably a couple times to make sure that you catch all of that excess. But going through a typical strainer and then going through cheesecloth, like maybe 4 to 5 times, will make it so you have none of that extra residue in there. And it should come out as a very super duper clean stock. I like the little extra in there. I'm not sure if it adds flavor, but it probably adds a little bit of nutrient and fiber to it as well too. But I hope that helps, Jenny. Elfrida, I've been hearing quite a lot about sumac lately. What do you say about that? Well, I love sumac. It's a great flavor that you can add to different things to kind of give a little pop of something that most people aren't used to. Sumac is something. I grew up in the Midwest and was used to having wild sumac grow kind of all over the place. So it's something that I grew up with, and I'm very familiar with on the flavor profiles. But adding just a little dash of it to different things can just totally brighten up a dish, or turn it into this whole other thing. And there's something about it. It's like this kind of, it's almost like a acidic umami-ish kind of flavor to it that's just so unique. But yeah, try out some sumac, and really I think it's best to experiment with some things. Try it on things you've already had to be able to get the full flavor profiles out of it. But yeah, sumac's becoming trendy lately. Saw many things in Bon Appetit using it in the past like 3 years. I was a little surprised by it, but I have a jar of it in my spice rack right now that I use. I don't use it a lot, but I do like it, just to kind of switch things up a little bit. I hope that helps. Lisa, what is kombu? Kombu is actually a seaweed. It's typically grown in, I think most of it's grown in the Japan area, but it is a very long seaweed. You typically get it dried, in strips about like this big or something like that in a square. And it is wonderful for cooking in beans. I actually made kombu bacon out of it as well too, using the process I talked about the mushrooms earlier, but you saute it in a pan, and I think there's oil involved in that one. Now I'm thinking about it. But kombu is a seaweed, and it's really great for nutrients. It adds nutrients into things you're cooking with. I use it in stocks, specifically dashi stocks, like Japanese stocks, where it's like a shiitake mushroom and kombu, basic combination. But super great. Do a little bit of research on it and pick up some, because you'll start to enjoy it. And it really adds a lot of nutrients to it. All right, so Laura, Chef Dan, thank you so much for your answer and the resources you provided. Can't wait to dive in. Great, glad to help, Laura. Donna, hello, Chef Dan. Please tell me how to bake cornbread without oil or egg. I've tried increasing the applesauce and other liquids, and my cornbread is hard and tastes like flour. That's no fun. Um, let's see, and thank you, Donna. So, wow, I can't remember what her name is, but there is a cornbread recipe that I've used for a long time, and like if you Google award-winning vegan cornbread, I'm going to do this on the fly right now. Vegan cornbread, and see if I can find it really quick for you. It's not something I typically do. Here it is. It's Dana Sly's Blue Ribbon Vegan Cornbread, and I am going to copy this and give it to Richard to post into our chat here. This is the recipe that I've been using, and I think it was originally on a different site, but this is actually the one that I use, and it's quite good, and it's very simple, easy to throw together. And for, being in Texas, we get a lot of Southern recipes here, but that's probably the one that I found that was probably the best one there. So I'll have Richard post that in. It might take him a second to be able to get that in there. But thanks for your question on that, Donna. We also have one on Ruby too. Actually, should probably point you towards the Ruby side as well. But that's the one I found and I use personally most often. Aravan, is avocado considered healthy for someone with heart disease? You're aiming to reduce more plaque buildup. Okay, yeah. So depending, so people in that situation, well, this is a doctor's question again. So I can't really tell you too much on the doctor aspect, but I can tell you that I do know from just reading Dr. Esselstyn's work a lot that avocado is definitely a healthier alternative to oil, so you can still have a higher cholesterol that builds up crazily from oil, which is wild. Like your good and bad cholesterol levels will kind of switch around a little bit. But for avocado wise, if you're looking to reduce the heart disease, going with it minimally is probably better. So avocado is fine, just don't do a ton of it. I do highly recommend the book by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, which is reversing. I can't remember what the name of the book is, but look up Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. He has a great book specifically on reducing or reversing heart disease that you should check out. And he talks about that specifically, but I can't go into too much detail because I'm not a doctor. I just know of the research that he's done specifically in that area. So I would try that out. Let's see. So Emma, do you have any tips on getting knife cuts more consistent in size and shape? I think my knife skills are pretty good, but I'd like to improve in this area. I'm interested to know if you have any tips on this. Emma, the biggest thing I can tell you on this is practice. Practice, practice, practice. They do sell cutting boards that have the measurements on them, that actually have the exact size of the brunoise and all the French cuts and stuff like that, which is great. I don't own one personally. I've known people to have them, but that's probably a good tool if you're really trying to get the exact consistent size and shape for your cuts down. The cutting board it's actually measured out on the cutting board, which is pretty nice to be able to do. I've seen most of those cutting boards in wood, which I was a little like, that's odd, because food is going to get in the grooves of where they put them in though. So I would try to find a plastic version of that if you can, just because it'll be easy to wash and typically dishwasher safe too. So, the biggest thing I can tell you is practice, practice, practice. And if you want to cheat a little bit, try getting one of the cutting boards that have all the measurements out on them, which is a really nice thing to be able to have. All right, so Aravant, if we cannot find organic cucumbers, then can we still use inorganic cucumbers in smoothies, or do we have to first peel off the skin to reduce the pesticides or avoid entirely? That's a matter of personal preference, Arvin. So, cucumbers have such a smooth skin on the outside that they're typically really easy to wash any of the pesticides on the outside of them off. So you can even do it like with cucumbers, you can even do it like a vinegar water mix. And it's not like half vinegar, half water. It's like a cap full of vinegar and like a gallon of water kind of a thing. And it'll take most of the pesticides off the outside. Now, of course, those pesticides are going to grow up into the plant and the inside of the cucumber as well. So you're not going to avoid all the pesticides that are in the conventional product. But if you're not going to have a smoothie just because you can't find the organic cucumber, then I would go for the cucumber. You could peel it to be able to make sure you get all of that off, but I think just cleaning it really well is probably the best way to be able to go. A lot of people don't like to peel the cucumber because it adds a bitterness to it, so you could peel it if you don't want the bitterness to it as well. But yeah, you could go with either of those. So it's personal preference on that. If you just want to stick with the organic cucumbers and not do it, that's okay too. But if it were me, I would probably just maybe take a peeler and do stripes on the outside of the cucumber after I've washed it really well, and then use it for my smoothie. All right, so here's another one from Aravon. Is following a vegan, no animal product diet our best foods? What is our best food sources of calcium? So that's an interesting question too. I think some of the best sources of calcium is that I've seen. It's actually from broccoli. I'm just going to do a quick search here because there's always a good list. They also do make a vegan calcium supplements as well too. But I'm typically going to get them right from my vegetables. So soybeans actually have a lot of calcium in them as well. Beans, peas, lentils. Those are probably the sources that I'd probably look for first. But they also do supplements as well if you're looking for those as well. But so soy products, those beans and lentils, probably a good place to start with those. All right, so Aravan, sourcing organic produce can be expensive. What are some tips you can share for cost optimization as a consumer? It's a great question. So for working for Whole Foods as long as I did, I work with organics quite a bit. And you find that organic products are typically 20% more per pound-ish, or per product, whatever it is, more than a conventional product. Now, what I do personally, even though I worked at a grocery store that specialized in organics, I didn't buy 100% organic groceries. I just couldn't afford it. Most people can't. And so what I did was I had to pick and choose where I wanted to buy organic, where I would always err on the side of buying organic. So I'd always buy organic if this was the case. If there were tiny little pieces where pesticides could go into, so I used the cucumber as an example earlier, right? The cucumber can be washed off really easy. Like if it's a red pepper, you can wash that pretty easily. But if it's something like broccoli or like raspberries, those pesticides can get down in between all of those little pieces, and it's impossible to clean all the pesticides out of there. So in that case, for things like broccoli or raspberries or blackberries, with all those little tiny grooves in it, I'm going to buy 100% organic all the time, or I'm not going to buy it. Now, that's my personal preference, though. Everybody's a little bit different in what they want to do. Sometimes that means you have to buy it frozen instead of fresh, just because it's out of season, and organic's a little harder to find if it's not in season as well. So that's my personal way to be able to go for organic versus conventional. Now, ways to be able to get it a little less expensive, organic products as well, is if you're buying in bulk. So instead of buying like a bag of beans in like a pre-sealed, resealable bag, go to the bulk departments in the grocery store to be able to see what they have. You'll typically be able to find organic ingredients for much, much cheaper using that method. As far as produce goes, maybe try some local farmers markets to be able to see. You can go directly to the farmer and get a better discount instead of having a middleman of a grocery store. Hope that helps a little bit. Sarah Ann, where do I buy kombu? Kombu can be found at most grocery stores nowadays. They're typically, they have, what are they, like international aisles, I think is what they call them. But you'll typically find things, like around soy sauces and, different kind of things like that. They'll have kombu there, and it's typically in a bag, with a couple sheets in them. You can also order them online. I know, I've seen them on Amazon and stuff like that where you can get them too. So a host of different places, but most grocery stores and their specialty aisles, but you can also go to specialty stores to be able to find them. I know like the Whole Foods markets typically always have them, but you're also going to find them in places like Kroger. It's in their international aisles as well. Kathy, when I cook soybeans, I soak them, discard the water, and add more water and freeze them. Defrost, drain off water, and cook. Okay. So I think that's a tip, is what you're saying, Kathy, is when I cook soybeans, I soak them, discard the water, add more water, and freeze them, then defrost and drain off the water to cook. Okay, yeah, basically what you're doing is getting rid of some of those toxins that come on the outside of them. So that's great. Thanks for the tip on that. Alfreda, in a lot of vegan recipes, I see egg and or cheese. What's your thought on that? I don't believe egg or cheese are plants. Maybe vegan does not mean plant-based. Well, no, it definitely does. So who's ever using egg and cheese in a vegan recipe is misinformed. because vegan definitely would not have any kind of an egg or dairy cheese in it. Now, that being said, there are vegan alternatives of each of those. So you can have vegan cheeses, and there are a huge amount of different vegan cheeses out there, and you use them depending on what your method is. If you need something to melt, like mozzarella over a pizza, you might use one style. But if you want to do a slice of something like brie, for a cracker, you'll have a different style. So there's a host of different styles of vegan cheeses you can use. Now, eggs are a little different. There are vegan eggs and egg replacers that you can buy. I think Follow Your Heart has like a little 6-pack of egg kind of thing looking thing that they use. And that's actually a vegan egg, and it's a substitute. They're typically in powders, but you can also use like what we were talking about earlier, some of the other things for like baking, like apple sauces or flaxseed or chia seed, depending on what your use is for those. But if you're looking at a recipe and it says egg or cheese and it's in a vegan recipe, they must be talking about something of those, or they're misinformed themselves. Hope that helps. Arvand, so if you're feeling very hungry and wanted to eat something fast, what one healthy vegan dish or recipe would you prepare? Let's see. If I'm really hungry and I have to eat fast, it's one of the things is working as a cook for as long as I did, I can make most meals pretty quickly. So kind of a go-to to make it fast and easy, it'd probably be like a ramen dish of some sort. I make really quick, I'll typically use a ramen with like a brown rice ramen noodle instead of like a traditional flour. And then I'll basically just chop up onions and mushrooms and cube tofu and put it into a hot wok. Start to get those cooked, caramelize it up a little bit, and then add my other vegetables that I have that I typically chop up vegetables and keep in my refrigerator so I can throw them in. And I'll be boiling water at the same time, toss it all together, and then do a sauce, like a brown sauce of, tamari and ginger and garlic and, maybe some other things like a mirin there. I use like a black garlic sauce a lot too, or a fermented bean paste. And I'll basically kind of throw all those together really, really fast. So that's probably one of my go-to, okay, everybody's really hungry. My little toddlers love ramen noodles like that too. And I don't do it in a soup. I do it more as like a noodle, kind of a dish. That's something that they love. So that's probably one of my quick, easy ones. All right. So, Alfreda, are you familiar with what is the Muslim bean pie? Muslim bean pie. And do you have a whole food plant-based recipe for it? I think I've heard of that pie before, but I don't know what's in it, so I wouldn't be able to tell you how to make one for it. Sorry about that. But if you email me at dan@ruby.com, I'll try to find something for you for it. Lisa, great brunch ideas. Thank you so much. I'm glad you liked them, Lisa. Happy cooking. Aravan, I've been told to eat more broccoli and Brussels sprouts. What are some creative oven-baked ways I can consume them? Wow, I love broccoli and Brussels sprouts in the oven. So let's see, for broccoli, I typically will just do a toss of salt and pepper on it. Might put a little tamari on it and put it in the oven, 350 degrees, and you'll start to smell it when it starts to kind of blacken on the edges as they're roasting. Super duper good. Same with Brussels sprouts, super easy to do. You don't need the tamari on the Brussels sprouts as much. My Brussels sprouts that I love to do, I'll shave them really, really thin. So I'll cut them really thin and then saute them in a pan with onions and red pepper and deglaze with a little white wine. Oof, that is so good with a lot of good freshly cracked pepper on it. Super good dish for that one as well too. So yeah, let's see. And then Barbara, is this being recorded? I just joined and this is awesome. I'm glad you liked it, Barbara. And yes, it is being recorded. It should be available in a couple hours as the recording. You can find it both on our Ruby platform, and we posted a couple days later, I think, on YouTube as well. So you'll find recorded versions of this. You can also search all of our recorded live events from the past. If you go up to your dashboard and look in the live section, you can search all of our old ones as well too. So happy cooking, everybody. I'm glad that everybody got to join us and we got through all of your questions. Join us next time for our office hours, and happy cooking. Have a wonderful day.